Lenora Ashcroft Vane, 37 years old and 12 years married, was handed a manila envelope in the front hallway of her own home on a Tuesday morning in October, while the leaves outside were still turning and the coffee she'd made was going cold on the kitchen counter. Her husband, Griffith Ashcroft Vane, 42, senior partner at Dunmore and Ashcroft Financial Group, stood near the staircase with his arms crossed. His mother, Elspeth Ashcroft Vane, 68, stood behind him slightly to the left, in the way people stand when they want to appear neutral but have spent weeks preparing for exactly this moment. She was holding a keyring. Lenora recognized it. It was the spare set, the one she'd given Elspeth 4 years ago during a renovation when someone needed to let the contractors in. Elspeth had never given it back. Lenora had forgotten she hadn't. She looked at the envelope. Then she looked at her husband. "We've had this conversation," Griffith said. Not unkindly, which was somehow worse. She hadn't known there was a conversation to be had. That was the thing nobody tells you about a marriage ending. Sometimes there are dozens of conversations happening on the other side of a wall you didn't know existed. And by the time someone hands you the evidence, you're already living in the conclusion. Lenora set the envelope on the hall table. She picked up her coat from the hook near the door. She said nothing. She walked out. She didn't take the coffee. What Griffith Ashcroft Vane believed at 42 was that he was a self-made man. This was not technically accurate. His father, the late Douglas Ashcroft, had built Dunmore and Ashcroft from a small regional firm into one of the more respected mid-size financial advisory groups in Ontario. What Griffith had done was inherit his father's name, his father's office, and his father's client list, and then spend the following decade telling himself that managing those things was the same as building them. Elspeth Ashcroft Vane had raised him to believe this. It was, arguably, her most consequential error. Lenora had never come from money. She'd grown up in Sudbury, the daughter of a woman who cleaned offices and a man who drove long-haul freight across the Shield 3 weeks out of every 4. What Lenora had was precision. She had the kind of mind that noticed things, patterns, inconsistencies, the way numbers told stories when you arranged them correctly. She'd studied accounting in Ottawa, stayed on for a master's, and was hired straight out of graduation by a small private credit firm called Heronvale Capital Partners. She worked there for 6 years. She was 28 when she met Griffith at a charity dinner she'd attended on her employer's behalf. She was 33 when she left Heronvale. Griffith had not asked her to. He'd simply made it clear, slowly, over the following year, that it was awkward, his word, for her to be working full-time when they were at this stage of their lives. He wanted children. He wanted a home that functioned. He had the income for both. It didn't have to be forever, he said. Just for now. Lenora had believed just for now meant something. 4 years is how long just for now lasted. 4 years of school runs that didn't materialize, because the children they planned never arrived. 4 years of Elspeth dropping by unannounced and walking through rooms like she was cataloguing them. 4 years of Griffith's hours growing longer and his phone going face down on every surface in the house. Her name was Yolanda Pressman, 31, associate director at a hospitality firm that held 2 of Dunmore and Ashcroft's mid-size accounts. Lenora had suspected for 8 months before she knew. She knew for 4 months before the envelope arrived. She had not said anything. Not because she was passive. Not because she was afraid. She was waiting. Elspeth Ashcroft Vane was the kind of woman who believed that family was a project, and that projects required a manager. She had managed Douglas through 39 years of marriage. She had managed Griffith through boarding school, through university, through a brief and unfortunate first engagement to a woman named Patricia, who'd had the audacity to have her own opinions. When Griffith had brought Lenora home the first time, Elspeth had been polite. She had remained polite, with enormous effort, for 12 years. What Elspeth objected to about Lenora was difficult to name precisely. It wasn't her background, she would have said if asked, though it was partly that. It wasn't her competence, though that was partly it too. What Elspeth objected to was the quality Lenora had of not needing approval, of standing in a room and neither seeking Elspeth's regard nor visibly withholding it. She was simply there, complete, without reference to anyone else's opinion of her. Elspeth found this intolerable. The morning of the divorce, Elspeth had dressed carefully. She'd worn cream. She'd arrived at the house on Ferndale Crescent at 7:30 a.m., an hour before Griffith planned to present the papers. She'd walked through the kitchen, poured herself a coffee, and settled in. When Lenora came downstairs, Elspeth had said good morning with a warmth that was the warmest thing she'd directed at Lenora in approximately 3 years. Lenora had said good morning back. She'd started the coffee maker. She'd moved through the kitchen the way she always moved through the kitchen. Quietly, precisely, without wasted motion. Elspeth had watched her and thought, in an hour, none of this will be her kitchen anymore. She had been wrong, but she wouldn't know that for another 6 weeks. Griffith had met Yolanda Pressman 18 months earlier at an industry event in Mississauga. She was bright, she was ambitious. She laughed at things he said in a way that Lenora had stopped doing approximately 3 years into their marriage. He did not think of himself as a man having an affair. He thought of himself as a man who had outgrown a situation. Yolanda had opinions about the house on Ferndale Crescent. She had communicated these opinions gradually, in the way people communicate important things when they know timing matters. The layout was dated. The neighborhood was fine, but Griffith could do better. The guest bathroom needed to go entirely. By the October morning when the envelope was placed in Lenora's hands, Yolanda had already been taken to view 2 properties in Rosedale. She had also been wearing, at the Dunmore and Ashcroft third-quarter review dinner 3 weeks prior, a bracelet, a thin gold cuff with a small amber inset stone. It had belonged to Lenora's grandmother. Lenora had left it in her jewelry box during a weekend in September when she and Griffith had ostensibly been in Niagara for his cousin's wedding. The bracelet had been there when she left. It was gone when she returned. She'd assumed she'd misplaced it. At the review dinner, she'd recognized it across the room before she recognized Yolanda herself. That was the thing about a piece of jewelry that belonged to your grandmother. You know it the way you know your own voice. She had not said anything at the dinner. She had smiled at the appropriate moments. She had thanked the server by name. She had gone home and sat in the kitchen for a long time in the dark. The next morning she'd made a phone call. What Griffith did not know, what he had never bothered to know, was what Lenora had done with her time after leaving Heronvale Capital Partners. He knew she'd consulted vaguely for a few small clients. He knew she'd done some finance stuff for a family trust that her former employer had passed her way as a courtesy. He had not asked questions because the income she generated was supplemental in his mind, and supplemental things did not require scrutiny. What Lenora had actually done between the years of Griffith's lengthening absences and Elspeth's uninvited catalogue tours was work. Quietly and methodically, she had continued the consulting practice she'd built at Heronvale. She had taken on a private family office as a client, then another. She had restructured the holdings of a retired couple in Oakville, whose previous advisor had been spectacularly incompetent. She had been referred, through that couple, to the board of a small community lending institution called Hartwell Credit Union, based out of Burlington, Ontario. She had been on the advisory board for 3 years. She had been appointed to the board of directors 2 years after that. She had been named board chair 14 months ago. Hartwell Credit Union was not a glamorous institution. It did not have marble lobbies or television commercials. What it had was a solid lending portfolio across a region that stretched from Burlington to the edge of Hamilton, a membership that had grown 40% in 6 years, and a reputation among the business community that knew it for being exacting about the terms of its commercial loans. Dunmore and Ashcroft Financial Group had held a commercial credit facility with Hartwell for the past 4 years. The original loan had been for renovation and expansion of their Oakville office. It had been renewed twice. The current outstanding balance, when Lenora had last reviewed the portfolio summary as board chair, was $412,000. Griffith had negotiated that loan himself. He had shaken hands with the branch manager. He had never attended a board meeting. He had never, in 4 years, once considered who sat on the board. He had signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday. Lenora had received them on a Tuesday. The next board meeting of Hartwell Credit Union was scheduled for the following Thursday. She did not change a single thing on the agenda. The weeks that followed the envelope were quiet, in the way a house is quiet when something large has moved through it and left. Lenora stayed initially with a colleague from her early Heronvale years, a woman named Dorrit Achebe, who lived in a tall townhouse in Westdale, Hamilton, and who made strong tea and did not offer a great deal of unsolicited commentary on the situation. This was exactly what Lenora required. Dorrit worked from home and asked, on the morning after Lenora arrived, whether she needed 1 mug or 2, then she went back to her desk. Lenora slept for 11 hours the first night. She hadn't slept that way in longer than she could trace. She hired a family lawyer. Her name was Carolyn Brandt-Osey, a 45-year-old partner at a firm in downtown Hamilton with a reputation for being technical and unhurried. Lenora liked her immediately. Carolyn reviewed the papers, noted that Griffith's lawyers had moved with unusual speed, and asked Lenora several questions in a tone that suggested she already knew the answers and was simply confirming. "Did you sign anything in the last 2 years that transferred any personal assets?" Carolyn asked. "No," Lenora said. "Were you named as a guarantor on any business instruments?" "No, but I'm aware of the existing financing." Carolyn looked up from the documents. "In what capacity?" "I'm board chair at the lending institution that holds the facility." A pause. Very brief. Does your husband know that? He does not. Carolyn set her pen down. She looked at Lenora for a moment. All right, she said. Let's talk about what you want. What Lenora wanted was not complicated. She wanted her grandmother's bracelet back. She wanted the equity in the marital home fairly assessed. She wanted no further contact from Elspeth Ashcroft Vane, expressed through the cleanest legal language available, and she wanted to continue doing her job without anyone attempting to make it inconvenient. She did not want Griffith Ashcroft Vane to fail. She was not by nature punitive. What she wanted was accuracy. She wanted the situation to be what it actually was, not what Griffith had decided it was from the front hallway on a Tuesday in October. The story would eventually surface in pieces, because these things always did. The first piece was the financial review. Dunmore and Ashcroft's commercial credit renewal was coming up in the first week of December. Hartwell's lending committee had flagged in the routine pre-renewal audit several items that warranted clarification. Funds from an operating account that appeared to have been used for personal expenditures, a declaration of business income that didn't reconcile cleanly with submitted tax filings from the previous year. A guarantor listed on the original loan documents who appeared to have no current attachment to the firm. The lending committee did not make accusations. It sent a letter, in formal language, requesting documentation and clarification before the December meeting. This was entirely standard procedure for any commercial renewal, with a balance above $300,000. The committee chair was not Lenora. The letter went out before the Thursday board meeting. It went out because this was what Hartwell's credit team did when numbers did not behave. Griffith received the letter on a Wednesday afternoon. He called his accountant. His accountant was not immediately available. He called his lawyer. His lawyer said the concerns raised were addressable, but would take several weeks to document properly, and that December was extremely tight. He called Yolanda, because he called Yolanda when things were difficult, and Yolanda said he needed to handle it, and she would be in Montreal that week for a conference. He did not call Lenora. It had not occurred to him to call Lenora. Lenora was someone he was divorcing. Lenora knew about spreadsheets, he thought, and had done some consulting and was, as far as he had ever cared to know, no longer professionally relevant to anything in his life. He wrote back to Hartwell Credit Union, requesting a meeting with senior lending staff before the December committee date. He received a response within 2 business days, informing him that any such meeting would need to include a full documentation package submitted in advance, that the lending committee met on a fixed schedule, and that the board chair would be present, as she was for all commercial credit reviews above a set threshold. He prepared the documentation. He hired a second accountant to review it. He came to the December meeting in a suit his tailor had made him, with his senior partner and his original lawyer, feeling that the situation was manageable. He did not look up when the board chair walked in. He was reviewing something on his phone, and then someone across the table said, "Good morning. I believe we've received your full documentation package. Thank you for the turnaround on that." He looked up. The board chair of Hartwell Credit Union was Lenora Ashcroft Vane, 37 years old, in a charcoal blazer, with her hair pulled back the way she wore it when she was working. She had a folder. She had a glass of water. She had no expression on her face that he could read. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Lenora said, "Why don't we get started?" She recused herself from the vote. She made this clear at the outset, stating for the record that she had a personal relationship with the principals of the business under review, and that the committee would be conducting its assessment without her involvement in the final determination. This was not theater. This was governance. It was what the role required, and she did it without hesitation. The committee took 3 weeks. Dunmore and Ashcroft's renewal application was declined, not due to the personal relationship, due to the documentation. The funds in question totaled $68,000 over 2 years, drawn through a corporate account and directed to expenditures, travel, accommodation, dining, that did not correspond to any client-facing business activity. The income reconciliation issue was more complex and had been referred to a forensic accounting firm the committee retained independently. The guarantor discrepancy was a clerical error, but the combination of issues created a risk profile that the committee assessed as outside their lending parameters at current balance. The letter arrived at Dunmore and Ashcroft on January 4th. Griffith's senior partner, a man named Alistair Fenn, 61, who had worked alongside Griffith's father for 20 years before the handover, read the letter twice. Then he asked Griffith into his office. Then he asked Griffith to explain the $68,000. That conversation lasted about 90 minutes. The one that followed with the firm's external auditors lasted considerably longer. Elspeth Ashcroft Vane heard about the credit denial from Griffith. She heard about Lenora's role from a friend who sat on a different board and had heard it from a Hartwell member who'd been present at a community event where someone had said something they shouldn't have. By the time Elspeth had the full picture, it was mid-January, and the picture was not one she'd planned for. She called Griffith. The conversation was not pleasant. "You didn't know," she said. "It was not a question." "Of course I didn't know," Griffith said. "For how long has she been on that board?" he told her. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when someone is reassessing a sequence of events in their own mind and finding that they do not come out well in the reassessment. "You should have paid more attention," Elspeth said finally. It was coming from Elspeth, a generous appraisal of the situation. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Carolyn Brandt Osey was methodical and thorough. The house on Ferndale Crescent was appraised, and the equity division proceeded according to the marital property legislation that Ontario applied without much room for creative interpretation. Griffith's lawyers had initially come in with a position that seemed to assume Lenora would not push back. She pushed back, not aggressively. She simply had Carolyn submit the correct numbers with the correct documentation and wait. The bracelet was returned in February, in a small padded envelope with no note. Lenora did not pursue the matter beyond accepting the return. The bracelet went back into her jewelry box. She closed the lid. She had moved into her own apartment in Burlington by then, a clean two-bedroom on the 6th floor with a small balcony that faced west, over the escarpment. She'd bought a coffee maker that took too long but made very good coffee. She'd bought a plant she had no particular expectation of keeping alive, but which, as of March, was doing fine. Her consulting practice, which Griffith had mentally filed under something she does, had 4 active clients by year's end and 2 on a waiting list. Dorrit, who had impeccable professional instincts, had started sending her referrals. A woman she'd met on the Hartwell board had recommended her to a small manufacturing firm in Dundas that needed a part-time financial controller. She'd taken it on 3 days a week. She was not rebuilding. That word implied she'd been leveled. She was simply continuing, in a direction she'd always been headed, without the weight of someone else's narrative pressing on the center of her chest. By spring, the story at Dunmore and Ashcroft had quieted in the way professional scandals do, not resolved, but absorbed, talked around, set aside for the practical reason that business had to continue. The forensic review had found what it found. Alistair Fenn had made certain decisions about the firm's going-forward structure. Griffith remained a partner, but a reduced one, in both title and income. Yolanda Pressman had accepted a position in Vancouver in February. The overlap between her departure and the decline of the Hartwell credit facility was not, as far as anyone could prove, directly related. Griffith did not contest this reading of events. He moved into a condo in the Distillery District that was stylish and somewhat small for a man who'd grown up in a house with a name. Elspeth Ashcroft Vane sent Lenora a card in April. It was a standard card, the kind you buy in a pharmacy near the sympathy section, repurposed. Inside, in Elspeth's precise handwriting, it said, "I should have been more fair to you." That was all. No signature, though the handwriting was unmistakable. Lenora read it twice. She set it on the kitchen counter. She made coffee. She looked at the card for a while. She did not write back, but she put the card in a drawer rather than the recycling bin, which was, for Lenora, a meaningful distinction. At the Hartwell Credit Union annual membership meeting that June, Lenora Ashcroft Vane was reappointed to the board by acclamation. The process took approximately 4 minutes. There were no objections. Afterwards, at the reception the credit union held in a hall adjacent to the meeting room, folding tables, good coffee, the kind of event you attend because it's local and it matters, a woman came up to her. She was perhaps 70, a long-time member, and she had a direct quality that Lenora found restful. "You've been doing good work," the woman said. "Thank you," Lenora said. "Is it hard, being board chair?" Lenora considered the question. Outside the tall windows of the hall, the escarpment was green, the way it got in June, fully and unambiguously alive after a long grey season. "Some of it is hard," she said. "Most of it is just doing the job correctly." The woman nodded, as if that answered something she'd been turning over for a while. She moved on to the coffee table. Lenora stayed by the window a moment longer, with her glass of water, looking at the trees. The leaves were full, and they didn't ask anyone's permission to grow.